that not a lot of people actually know about in terms of the Meta Knight ban discourse. So the ban vote ended up being unanimous across the board. There was like 15 members on the committee, and 3 abstains and 12 voted to ban the character. At the time, actually, I guess this is just like from private discussions that hadn't actually seen the light of day, but I was actually one of the only holdouts in terms of the in terms of pro ban, because at the time I was very of the anti-ban camp, and one of the things that I actually negotiated for in order to flip my vote so that they could say that it was a unanimous vote by the committee was that in order to make this so that there's some legitimacy for it, we had to make sure that there was some sort of test period between the actual banning and where people could actually phase into the rules of either running a pro ban or an anti-ban rule set and still have it be considered part of the legitimate tournament, so to speak, because Smashboards back then had a if you're
we actually had
the
legitimate
Unity rule
tournaments
set,
back then. Yeah.
they had like kind of like a
was-
sanctioned system nationally in terms of whether they're allowed to be advertised on Smashboards or featured on
remember
Smashboards if
that.
they ran rule sets and stuff like that. There's actually an economic interest for tournament organizers back then to play around those things, and but I wonder if maybe that was a mistake on my end pushing that, because it doesn't appear that the community really wants to have a choice in what rule set they run. It seems like if you go online right now, if anybody runs something that's very different than what they're used to in terms of current rules, it's meant very negatively. Like, oh my god, this tournament is running
WarioWare.
something different. Yeah,
MLG
don't go to it,
2010 rules.
Right. So I wonder if that's part of something that we lost as a community, some of this acceptance that of some of the things that are part of the game are just part of the game, and it's not worth vilifying for it. Actually, some of those things that you personally might not like about a game might be something that someone else actually really likes about the game, in terms of things like, off the top of my head, stage variety is a very big thing that I'm super concerned about, or actually very sad about for Ultimate in particular, given imagine a slap to the face of Nintendo. They make a mode by which we can make stages competitive, end quote, but we still decide to ban all the stages anyway, and at which point you kind of incentivize Nintendo. Well, what's the point of trying to make anything that's competitive? They're just going to probably end up banning it anyway.
I think that's why they ended up like putting all the music to like one stage. Like you can actually change the, or not change the music, but it's like, hey, all the music on one stage is now on the battlefields or the FTs. You can hear everything.
Yeah, I
now.
love that addition.
That was a great addition. Good job,
Yeah.
Nintendo.
Yeah, no, because I agree, because I think Nintendo, you have to understand too, on their end. I wonder how much of, again, there's economic incentives in it. They have this big game that's a celebration of all their flagship franchises in terms of their intellectual properties, but they have this really passionate community that a lot of people respect, because it's the legitimate competitive form of how the game is played. And that community is very reactionary and ends up stripping a lot of the things that are included in it. So what was ultimately at one point this brilliant marketing or capability of being a brilliant marketing scheme for Nintendo turns into something that we end up only hearing the Super Smash Brothers theme on Battlefield, or the same song on Smashville over and over and over again, instead of actually celebrating the intellectual property diversity of Nintendo.
It becomes super bare bones. Yeah.
Right.
With that discussion, it really comes down to what you want out of the game. I think as far as competition goes, like personally, I'm more for a like very limited stage list. I think that like even so much as Yoshi's Island, where in Brawl, where Sonic and Donkey Kong have abusable mechanics that can, like, if not flip matchups, at least like totally throw it into a different way of playing.
Spend your ban.
And a lot of the Meta Knight discussions, yeah, and exactly. I don't know. I feel like being forced to spend it on Yoshi's against those characters is kind of dumb, in my opinion. But as far as the Meta Knight discussion goes, a lot of that also like pertains to the stage list. Like I remember a lot of people were running the Japanese rule set shortly after Apex, when it was brought up that a lot of the Japanese players were anti-ban, and part of that could be attributed to they have a smaller stage list. They don't really they don't deal with like the super janky aspects of Meta Knight being able to abuse like Frigate and back then Rainbow Cruise and Brintstar, which I don't even want to talk about.
I love Rainbow Cruise.
Yeah, like don't get me wrong, they can be fun to play on, but as far as matchup goes, I think that like certain stages, especially those ones, can take away from the skill aspect of the game. Whereas I personally think it should come down to like and you could also argue that like being able to deal with those stages and whatnot is attributed to skill, but in terms of like raw skill, yeah, it's a different kind of skill set. But I think that it should be like make the matchup more towards the characters and what the characters have rather than this extra thing of like and again, like stage bans and how many stage bans, that's decided by us. That's not decided by the game. Whereas the game is the game itself. So
yeah, kind of to add on to that. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. Kind of to add on to that. I don't think also like there's not like a really right answer to like which skill set we should be trying to test as like competitive players. It's just kind of whatever the community wants. Like I don't think there's like if players don't want to deal with slants or like I mean like in Ultimate like there's the slant discussion, like people don't like the slants in Ultimate. Or like other like janky stages that we played on Brawl, like Rainbow Cruise and Brintstar. People don't want to
Plaza.
Yeah, people don't want to test that skill set. The community doesn't want to test that skill set. I think that's totally fine. Personally, I like those stages, and I like testing players' like knowledge on stages. But yeah, I mean, if we want to focus on a specific skill set, yeah, I mean, I think that's totally fine to do.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely kind of agree with 686 in terms of like my personal opinion on what I like for stages. I would also say that in a way, I think that a lot of stages, like the ones that have been used already and a lot of mechanics, were tested, like looking at Ultimate, because a lot of the people making the decisions were around when those stages were actually legal. Like Delfino and Halberd and all that kind of stuff, even Lilat. Obviously, that doesn't give the new players a chance to learn from it as well. But when people are deciding on a rule set, I don't think these are people who just like, I mean, I guess testing it is different from just like playing it themselves. Like you want to see how the community deals with it. But I feel like the people making those decisions are kind of expecting the same outcome, maybe in terms of the negatives of why people didn't like those stages originally and why they were, gradually removed. One other tiny thing.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to say,
I'm sure yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, the other tiny thing I just wanted to say is it's not even really relevant to the argument, but just as a little thing, we were talking about the how they added the music and the small battlefield and everything. Although your point around that, Lux, makes perfect sense. About how the Nintendo's not getting a chance. Why bother and all that. I just wanted to point out though that I'm pretty sure they specifically did that because it applies to small battlefield, and FD, which are the stages that can be selected as one unit in quick play. So that's their way of just kind of like having a competitive rule set that's somewhat universal for like quick play and elite smash. I think that was more their approach.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, definitely. It's an addition to trying to work around, I think, some of the community determining things. One of the things that I would push back a little bit on, and this actually might pick up where Hunter might have been hinting at a little bit, was sometimes one of the things that concerned me about the Brawl community was that it seemed like the community had determined what rule set that they wanted to play by, but there were other interests that were at play that ultimately overrided the community interest. The biggest example I could think of was you had the Unity rule set committee unanimously voting to ban Meta Knight. And that was just a representation of the broader community because it had not every top tournament organizer, but I would say Hunter, like 80% of the top community organizers in the community. Right. But on the flip side, the Meta Knight ban was ultimately undone because one tournament organizer in the community that just so happened to host the biggest tournament in the community decided that he wanted to not ban Meta Knight because it made it so that he was able to attract more Japanese players to come to the tournament. So it was one of this weird dynamics that I think actually where it's contrary to what we were talking about, where the community actually kind of had not a consensus, but definitely a majority opinion on what direction that they wanted to go. But it was undone, not necessarily by community will, but a specific economic interest in how the community is shaped, or a social interest in how the community was shaped. And I guess looking back on it, that's kind of been some of my frustration, that there seems to be this inordinate power in the community structure that a small group of people can ultimately determine for the community what they want, as opposed to what we were saying, what we actually want to see is where the community determines for itself what they want to play. Because I would agree with Hunter that there is no right or wrong way to play the game. And that's why I'm willing to be kind of agnostic about it. If the current modern day Brawl community thinks Ice Climbers and Mennonite are good, then, you know, hey, it's their game. They want to play it that way. They should have more power to it. It's just I think one of the bigger, I guess, maybe failures or negative legacies out of the Brawl community was the inability to really collaborate and escape the prisoner's dilemma, if you will, of to actually make some sort of positive rule set change for the community, as opposed to remaining in the situation where we are trapped by the bigger social factors in the community, whether it's the Apex tournament series back then, or the loss of the top players going to locals now because they need to stream to make money. There's so many social factors and economic factors that we don't actually consider that are shaping how we play the game, that it's wild to me. That I wish there was actually more study and looking into some of these factors.
Don't forget Evo Customs.
Oh,
right. Oh, that's a big example of that. That's another example where maybe I'm a little guilty of hypocrisy on that end, because the Evo Custom situation ended up being where a movement started by Amazing Ampharos out of the Kansas City scene, that they showed that customs were viable to be used in tournament on a logistics level.
Yeah.
But whether the community actually wanted to play with them is a different matter. But I know Amazing Ampharos was able to test the logistics on that on customs, and if they were viable on any sort of scale, because his local TO at the time was very receptive towards having customs in the game.
So was
namely his local TO was me, actually. So
hey,
the same
that's
one
my
there.
role and how all this plays into it. So if you want to talk about customs being at Evo and ruining that experience, my bad, guys. I didn't know what I was doing
Thanks,
back
bud.
then, but
Now blame John Numbers. He pushed it.
But yeah. Oh yeah, John Numbers too. There's a big movement. I guess there's a lot of contention on like how the game should be played. That we were never able really to reconcile a good way during those formative years. And the unfortunate part is that spills over now into today. I think is a big driver in some of that toxic discourse that we see of people just kind of screaming out into the void. We need to change this, or we need to change that, instead of actually collectively working together to bring about change that's positive and in solidarity with one another.
Backtracking a little bit back into the Apex, it was because, I mean, you had the big lure of bringing in the Japanese players. I want to say Apex 2010, the one where we had Brood come over, Brood, Suinoko, the one where Brood upset Mewtwo King and got second.
Right.
From that point, it was like that was such a big, it was a big draw for anybody that like when you wanted to get, especially since we had like such scarcity of big nationals, Apex of course being the big one for us back then. When you had the Mennonite ban situation, and then you had essentially either Mennonite will be banned, and then you have this big national that, should he have been banned, it probably wouldn't have drawn nearly the numbers, especially for like Apex 2012. I want to say that was the biggest Brawl tournament for us. At least at that time, it was 336, if I'm not mistaken. Some big number like that. But would it have drawn the same without the lure of Japan? Because then you have players from all over the US that want to test your mettle against the Japanese players, people that you'll never ever really see except maybe once or twice a year, maybe. So it was like such a vicious catch-22. You either do it for the competitive base, that the ones that want to test everything, but you know, Mennonite's got to be there, or you lose that lure and you might lose that drawing power that you have, and it's gone.
Yeah.
Again, like, while there was a lot of people for the ban, I think that a huge part of that was because those stages, like the more polarizing stages, the better stages for Meta Knight.
It's true.
Yeah, it was
That's
kind
true.
of weird. Kind of weird that Strife that he kept Meta Knight legal for the Japanese players, but then didn't adapt or adopt their stage
The
list.
rule set, yeah, we had like such a really, even going back to like the MLG stage list days, we had wacky stage lists that really, really empowered the bat. And I don't think you had enough bans or characters didn't have enough tools to deal with them. Especially at that time, we were all kind of like drowning to bear camping, air camping, planking, especially on the stages with like the fall through floors, Halberd, Delfino, and you got Meta Knight just, casually flying under the stage, avoiding the ledge grab limit.
Changing the rules literally to cater to Meta Knight, both positively and negatively. It's kind of weird how that played out. We would have thought we would have figured that out. We would have figured out a uniting theory behind it and actually made some sort of productive changes. But yeah, I think maybe shifting. Oh, you got to go ahead. 686. What's up?
So, well, I think you can say that it does like cater to Meta Knight. It's also like, I don't know. Personally, I think those stages should be gone regardless, because there's also other characters that can, abuse it over others. And again, like when I talk about Yoshi's and Lila, I'm not talking about Meta Knight. I'm talking about like Sonic and
Sonic DK.
Yeah. I think that it's more than just Meta Knight that plays into the stages being terrible. Now, if you look at Melee, like they don't have any characters that inherently abuse the older stages. Maybe Jigglypuff or like a couple exceptions, but for the most part, like they always had a very conservative stage list regardless. And I think that Brawl, I never really understood why Brawl shied away from that so much. While the stages, again, they can be fun, I think that it takes away from like, it really does take away from the competition aspect when you have like, I have to spend my ban on these like stages that'll screw me in the matchup. Whereas, it could be like up to complete preference what your ban is. So,
Yeah, I think it's funnily enough, the debate I think is going to continue on and on, to time immemorial, and it also continue on throughout the series. So I think it's something. If you take anything away from it, what I would like to see for the community is that, as you can tell from the panel, that we don't necessarily 100% agree with each other on things, but we're still able to talk about it in ways that's not absolutely toxic to each other and horrible to each other. So hopefully that's something that we can continue to drive throughout the community.